Hi everyone, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to First Metro Securities 2Q25 Philippine Economic Insights with the Ateneo Center for Economic Research and Development. ACERD is an academic think tank from the Ateneo de Manila University focused on advancing policy recommendations that promote industry competition and economic growth. I am Ange Bakay, Equity Research Associate from First Metro Securities Research, and I will be hosting today's session. This afternoon, Dr. Luis Dumlao will provide us with a rundown of the Philippines' second quarter GDP results and economic performance. He will also share with us ACERD's outlook and insights for the country for the remainder of the year. As a brief background, Dr. Luis Dumlao is a senior fellow of the Ateneo Eagle Watch. He was the former dean of the John Gokongwei School of Management at the Ateneo de Manila University. His areas of expertise include macroeconomics and international financial economics. Before we proceed with today's session, let me go through some house rules for our event. All attendees will be muted during the presentation. If you have any questions, feel free to type them in the Q&A box and we will address them shortly during the Q&A session. Finally, we would like to remind everyone that the views and opinions expressed during this webinar are those of ACERDS and do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of First Metro Securities and the Metrobank Group. So, without further ado, I will now pass on the floor to Dr. Luis Dumlao.
Okay, good afternoon. Thanks for having me. I'll turn off my video just to save some band space. And then I'll share, and I'll need help from Ange whether my presentation is already on the screen. Ange,
It's already visible.
so it's there. Okay. So thank you once again for having me for the second quarter 2025 Philippine Economic Insights with First Metro Securities. First of all, I'll go with the highlights of what I'll be presenting today. The first one is I'll talk about, so it's kind of my standard, my SOP presentation. So first I'll talk about growth because growth isn't everything, but without growth, everything is nothing. Without growth, we can either ask the miserable to remain in misery, or we can take away from the haves to give it to the have-nots. But with growth, we can give to both haves and have-nots. Then I'll talk about prices because less is more, following the minimalists' adage. And then I'll talk about unemployment because causing job losses means causing grave social harm, quoting from the late Pope Francis. Then I'll go to international, to finance. I'll first go to international finance, which is uh, uh, sort of a good news. And then we have public finance, and this is where the quote I have, which is 3 down, X to go, which I will explain later on in this presentation. So I'll go with growth, quoting from Angela Merkel. Uh, we need three things above all: first, growth; second, growth; and third, growth. Growth isn't everything, but that's true. But without growth, everything is nothing. So again, we can either ask the miserable to remain in misery without growth, or without growth, we have to take from the haves and give it to the have-nots. And with growth, we can give to everyone across the board. So it's the growth is 5.5% in the second quarter of this year, which is fairly as expected. We anticipated it to be 5.4%. And then GDP, we look at it in a perspective, GDP now in the last 20 years. Then we'll look at the business as usual benchmark or base case scenario. What's going to happen to GDP growth if nothing changes, everything's normal, or we just show up to work every day doing nothing differently. So this is the growth the past 20 years. What I have in dots is what is referred to as the steady state growth. So this is the natural path or the natural growth of the economy, or the base case scenario if we just show up to work and do nothing. And the solid lines are the actual growth. The blue ones are during President Arroyo's. The yellow ones is President Aquino. The red ones are President Duterte, and the green ones are uh, the present administration. And you'd see here the growth tend to peak during presidential election periods. So this is the election of President Arroyo. This is the Hello Garci election. And then then you have the global financial crisis. And then the next one is the mild spike during the presidential election of President Pinoy. And then uh, the uh, the hurting of the economy when President Aquino decided to shut down or to suspend government spending because in suspicious that in, in, suspecting that prior contracts were corrupt and actually hurt the economy. And then this is the presidential election of President Duterte. Of course, the downward spike during the COVID-19 pandemic, and then the presidential election of President Marcos Jr. And what we have now is an output gap. So if the natural growth would have been 6.2%, but the actual growth is 5.5%, that is what is referred to as a negative output gap of 0.7%. We're growing slower than our natural growth. The business cycle of income. So what I have here in reds are the base case scenarios. So for example, the latest one that went out was the second quarter, and we anticipated it to be 5.4%, but then it grew a bit faster at 5.5%. So it overshoot the cycle by a little, by 0.1%. And one of the reasons why the economy grew faster than it could have, because the base case scenario is agriculture would have grown by only 1.4%, but instead it grew by 7%. The rest of the year is going to pick up to 5.6 and 5.6%, so that annually, the annual growth is going to be 5.5%, which is 0.7% less than the steady state growth of 6.2%. But still, it is within the government range of lower side of between 5.5 and 6.5%. What I have here, so those who are in long run planning, is this is the number of years sectors and subsectors will double. So as you would see, for example, if you are the fastest growing one is in accommodation and food service. And accommodation and food service will double in 6 years. So for example, the way I would look at it is if you are the planning of a corporation or a company, and if you are in accommodation, if your asset does not double in 6 years, then basically you're missing out on the market share. The second one, of course, is transport and storage. And then you also have construction. Construction will double in 9 years. Finance. So people in First Metro is in finance insurance. It will double in 9 years. And then professional and business service. Professional business will double in 9 years. The more important one is accommodation is not as important as far as macroeconomics is concerned per se, because what you'd see here, so pardon the size, even if accommodation and food service will grow the fastest, so it will what is going to be the next 10 years, so it will almost triple the next 10 years, but its size is still relatively small compared, for example, to finance, construction, professional service, uh, and uh, and also uh, and also construction. So two times the accommodation is the fastest, but the size is still relatively small compared to transport, construction, finance, and professional service. Okay. The second one that you would see here is the fourth biggest subsector today is agriculture, and fishery. So it's in order, in size, in the blue ones, which is the present. But the next 10 years, you would see here that construction will now the red ones, the professional service, and then real estate, which is this one, and transport will overtake agriculture. So they will be bigger than the agriculture subsector. It remains to be a service sector, and the biggest one is the service sector. But in 10 years' time, it would be more dominated by the service sector. I go now to the business cycle of expenditure. Uh, Again, the better than expected by 0.1%. So we anticipated to be 5.4%, but grew by 5.5%. Uh, the import is a negative, so it's 9.7%, but it's only 2.9%. And that's why probably this 5.5% is greater than the what was anticipated, which is 5.4%. Again, the rest of the year, this is in its statistics, it's called mean reversion. That means it will slowly go back to the steady state. So 5.6% in the third and fourth quarters, but for the year, it's 5.5%, which is a negative 0.7 output gap. The net primary income is expected to more than offset the net export. So basically, as a percentage of GDP, these are important numbers. Net primary income in absolute values. So for example, in the third quarter, 18 plus 18. So 18 is a bigger absolute value than 10.6, which means the dollar that goes out because of the trade deficit will be more than offset by the dollar that comes in, and it used to be primarily with OFW. But we keep in mind these are double-digit growths. I'll come back to this when I'll talk about international finance later in this presentation. So, I might as well go on to just to so the question now, are there new modern heroes out there? Because what's happening basically is the OFW has not been growing. It's been growing, but only 3%. And these ones are double-digit growth in net primary income from abroad. That means there are something out there that we do not know yet that's causing dollar income to come into this country. Uh, the ones that will double is investment. It will double in 8 years. We become predominantly a trade economy. So, for example, import will double in 8 years. So again, capital formation now versus in 10 years, capital formation is the one will grow the most. It will more than double. Consumption will not more than double. But then again, still, it's going to be predominantly a consumption-led economy because consumption is still has the biggest part. The economy, the Philippines, is still going to be the fastest growing economy in major East Asia. Although, albeit, once again, we are still in a negative output gap. Okay. How are we doing in terms of World Bank income classification? So this is once income is below 1,000, if one's income is above $1,136 per year, then what would qualify as a low middle income? So here you have India, Philippines, Vietnam, for example, to give us some perspective. If you reach more than $4,496 per year, then one would become an upper middle income. And as you see here, the Philippines just missed it by $26 last year. So we can expect that by this year, when all is said and done, we will be classified as an upper middle income economy. Uh, uh, Although, just warning, sometimes the problem is this 4496, this threshold here, even this threshold sometimes move. So even if we move and if this red classification move upwards even more, then we will not. But all said being done, if the classification is held constant, then we will be upper middle by in 2025. Of course, what's upper middle income? That would be Indonesia, Thailand, Malaysia, just to give us a perspective. And then the high income uh, is above $13,935 per year. I'll go now to inflation because less is more, following the minimalists adage. Uh, with inflation of 0.9%, so inflation now is at near 6-year low. Uh, but we put it into perspective. How good or bad is it from a historical perspective? What are the causes? And where on regional basis? And then looking forward. So on historical basis, this is over 50 years of inflation. So what you see here is shocks are usually externally driven and supply side, as if we are passive victims of what happens abroad. So for example, uh, this is your first oil crisis resulting to inflation of round about 30.5%. Then you have the second oil crisis. This is the taking over of the Ayatollah Khomeini of Iran. And then I have this in different color because this is self-inflicting. And this is the Philippine debt crisis in 1983, 1984, 1985 that eventually led to the 1986 People Power. Then you have the global recession and in Kuwait, in invasion of Kuwait. Then you have the Asian financial crisis of 1998. So that's the Asian financial crisis of 1998. And then you have the Iraq War and the increase in the value-added tax. So I have it in blue because it's sort of a self-inflicting. That is when we first introduced the value-added tax uh, in our tax collection. Then the global financial crisis that started in the United States. And then here the rise, this is self-inflicting because we started to say we took our pride into our pride took over as if we said we could be self-sufficient and stop importing. In the end, we end up hurting ourselves with the spike in with the spike in inflation. And then the global price of rice picking up. That's not our fault, and also the invasion of Ukraine. For every administration, the average inflation has decreased except for President Duterte. So for example, an average inflation of 16% during President Marcos Sr., an average of 12% during President Cory Aquino, an average of roughly 8% during President Ramos, and an average of 4%, 4.5% during President Arroyo, and then here less than 3% during President Pinoy, and then that's the only time it picked up to around about 4% during President Duterte, and starting to go down again, 3.6% so far with President Marcos Jr. Okay, so I look now inflation per commodity. You'd see here the 0.9% is near 6-year low. And then there is deflation in rice. So the price of rice has actually declined. And then there is inflation in meat and fish. A lot of times, so there's a decrease in price in transport, and that has to do with year on year. The global price of oil has actually declined from $77 per barrel to around $71 per barrel. I look at it on a regional basis. So July on July, easing inflation in all regions except mainly in Mindanao. Because in Mindanao, you actually have deflation. Prices actually had gone down. So in BARM, negative 1.7%, Soc Sargen, negative 1.3%, Davao Region, negative 0.4%, Northern Mindanao, 0.6%, and in Visayas, only one region, Eastern Visayas, negative 0.2%. Do June to July, there is an easing of inflation in 16 of 19 regions. Uh, the target inflation is 3%. The actual inflation is 0.9%. So here we try to explain why inflation is 3%, not zero, why inflation is 0.9%, not the target 3%. But looking the contributors, the biggest one, for example, you have corn and rice deflating. So their price actually going down by 16%. And then we have transport, around about 7%, and vegetable became cheaper by 5%. However, prices of meat and fish had gone up by 9% and 6% respectively. The consumer price index, or the basket of goods that measure inflation, is composed of about 60 items, and they have different weights. But nonetheless, considering their weights, basically with the target of 3%, if we just include meat and fish, the contribution of meat and fish, inflation would have been 3.6%. But if we include rice, transport, vegetables, and four others, so I have here rice, transport, veggies, uh, and then here the and then the rest, okay? That would be, so I put them up 3.6%, and then I add up those with deflation, and that's going to be 0.9%. And that pretty much explains why inflation is 0.9%, not 3%. Everything else in the basket of goods balances out, basically. Um, This is why inflation is expected to stay down, and that is because of the base effect. The rice has the second biggest weight in the consumer price index. So I have your graph which started in the promise of 20 pesos per kilo. So the present administration started about July 2022, when the price of rice was about 40 pesos and 80 centavos per kilo. And then it started to go up and go up, and then it went up to close to about 51 pesos per kilo last year. And then the base effect is it's been going down. So it's gone down to negative 15%. So that's why rice inflation has been going down. But still, you would see here in reference to where it started, 40.8 is still, so it's still higher than, so around just over 43 pesos per kilo, which is still about over the original. So when the administration started, which is 40 pesos and 80 cents per kilo. Another reason why inflation could be is pressured to be low for the near future is the contribution of oil, and we would see here again year on year the price of oil has gone down from $77 per barrel to $71 per barrel. So still a downward pressure as far as the influence of oil is concerned. And therefore, looking forward, if the latest data was July, and inflation in July was 0.9%, this month we expect inflation to be 0.9% once again. But the average for 2025 is going to be 1.4%. So inflation in meat and fish prices rise to continue to go up, but price of rice, operation, transport, and veggies will continue to has gone down, or a deflation, negative of opposite of inflation, which is deflation. I now go to unemployment. because causing job losses means causing grave social harm, quoting from the late Pope Francis. So what is the 3.7% unemployment in June in reference to the population? Uh, so, so what do official rates mean in headcounts? So we approximate the population to be population as 113,556,000. Of those, closely 114 million, 33,776,000 of them are younger than 15 years old, so they cannot be part of the labor force. That leaves us with close to 80 million. That is 79,780,000 that are at least 15 years old. Of those, 27,357,000 are non-participants. So for example, college students who are above 15 years old, who are studying full-time, they are not part of the labor force. Another example are those who are retirees. They're obviously older than 15 years old and they're no longer working and therefore they are not part of the labor force. That leaves us with a 65.7% labor force participation rate, and that is what government says the labor force, this is what basically what government is publishing. So that approximates to 52,423,000. Of those in the labor market, basically, 3.7, according to government data, is the unemployment rate. And that calculates to 1,948,000 that are unemployed. This leaves us with an unemployment of the 96.3% employment rate. That translates to 50,474,000. Of the over 50 million that are employed. So I'll go first with some research because a lot of times foreigners ask me, how can the unemployment be lower than, for example, Canada, and that or lower than the United States? What else? The entire Euro bloc, and Euro bloc is around 5.5% unemployment rate. US is around 4.9%. But one of the explanations there is for you to be employed, if you work just 1 hour within the month, then just 1 hour within the whole 1 month, you're already classified as employed and you are no longer unemployed. That's the first one. The other one is a lot of people who are not looking for a job the last 6 months, okay, not interviewed, they're not participants. They're not part of the labor force, okay? And then there's a finding by these people that says that the unemployment benefits motivate workers to be active in the labor force and can help to keep workers in the labor force. So what we have is the hypothesis would be is that if the strategy of government transfer is unconditional, for example, ayuda, then recipients do not have to be unemployed and have less incentive to participate in the labor market. So if it's ayuda, you don't have to be unemployed. But if it's unemployment benefits, it's conditional. You have to be unemployed. And if you have to be unemployed, you have to declare yourself unemployed. And for you to receive a benefit, you have to show proof that you have been applying for jobs. And government can even require you to look for jobs. So the lower participation lowers the unemployment, basically. For example, a simulation the labor force participation rate is 65.7. If we raise that by 66.7, just 1 percentage point, and unemployment would potentially become 5.2%, which is already, then it becomes at par with OECD countries. In any case, of those over 50 million that's employed, there goes this is now your underemployed, 11.4%. So that's 5,763,000. So this could be the vendors working more than 8 hours but not making enough, Or this could be the part-time workers, for example, only working 2 hours a day and therefore employed but not making enough, so underemployed. So that leaves us with an employment rate of 44,712,000. Of course, a part of the non-participants are also the OFW. They're not here in the Philippines. They're not participating in our labor market. That's 2,160,000. In headcount, in rates, the unemployment rate had gone down from 3.1% to 3.7, had gone up from 3.1 to 3.7%. So the underemployment decreased by 0.7% from 12.1 to 11.4. In headcounts, however, at net, there are 525,000 new entrants in the labor market, many of them fresh graduates. And then of the 525,000, 196,000 found jobs and 329,000 did not find job and became unofficially unemployed. In terms of underemployment, there is a net gain of net upgrade from underemployment to normal employment of 320,000, a 5% decrease in underemployment. I go now to sector and subsector. So the main sectors, of course, are agriculture, industry, and services. So as far as those sectors are concerned, there is a net gain of 197,000 jobs. I now go to the subsectors. The subsectors with the biggest share are wholesale, agriculture, hunting and forestry, and construction. And that's 49% of all employment. These biggest three subsectors lost 896,000 jobs. By job creation, so the biggest winners are fishing and aquaculture, wholesale and trade, and financial and insurance activities. And they produced 1,214,000 jobs. By job loss, the biggest losers are construction, agriculture, and manufacturing. They lost 1,695,000 jobs. I go now to finance. I'll explain. So 3 down, X to go. So that will be a recurring thing, and I'll go through that. Why is that? In terms of the international finance, the peso, we expect the peso to move sideways. In fact, it can actually even appreciates from 56 pesos to 87 cents to go down to 55.88 according to the purchasing power parity theory. Or it can depreciate according to uncovered interest parity theory. But nonetheless, we expect it to move sideways. We are 95% sure that it will be within 54.73 to 59.01 pesos per dollar. And then you have, of course, the other biggest currencies that's traded around the world. You have the Japanese yen, the British pound sterling, and the euro, looking like moving sideways with these currencies also. I go now to gross international reserve via the import cover. So the import cover is the equivalent number of months of import is our gross international reserve. So for example, it went down in 2008. The international reserve was equivalent to 5.9 months during the global financial crisis. As a uh, uh, as a standard or generally accepted import cover is 6 months. So it went down to 6.6 months during the global financial in October 2018. Okay, this is now the build, the importing of materials to to uh, to to enable the Build program of President Duterte. And then because of the lockdowns, December 2020, the gross international reserve was at record high of $110 billion, which was equivalent to more than 1 year, so 12.6 months. And then these days, the last data was July 2025. We have a reserve of $106 billion, which is equivalent to 7.2 months of import. So in terms of reserve, we have a relatively strong, big amount of reserve. Uh, what I have on the blue uh, is the net primary income from abroad in relation to GDP. And then what I have in red is usually a result of the trade deficit. And in the last 4 quarters, so the size, the height of this compared to the height going down here. So net primary income will more than offset the uh, the the dollars. So the dollars that come in thanks to the net primary income from abroad will more than offset the dollars that go out because of the trade deficit. Okay. Okay, so we said that the net primary income of abroad has been increasing by double digit, something like 15% per year. So what's going on? So here, what we see here is the OFW remittance is still increasing in dollars. So for example, last year it was in record $34.5 billion that came in last year because of just because of remittance. Okay. But then again, in terms of growth, uh, it's been growing by only about 3%. So given that OFW remittance in percentage growth, the economy will rely on it. But the question now is, which is also a puzzle, is something we should look at is, so as academics, we are in the race to find out what's going on. Okay, so if the OFW is growing by only 3% and the net primary income from abroad is growing by roughly 15%, then there is an additional 12% that's coming in that cannot be explained by OFW. So how does the net primary income from abroad continue to increase in double digits? Uh, there could be modern heroes out there. We don't know. But let's just say, for example, content creation. YouTube, dollar comes in with when you do content creation. Then there's online work and maybe the digital nomad visa. Before the passing of the digital nomad visa, there are already nomad workers. The digital nomad visa basically is it allow foreigners to stay here and work here remote from given that their work is from abroad and therefore they would be receiving income coming in. And then there's remote intelligence. Again, people talk about AI, artificial intelligence. I want to bring up RI, which is remote intelligence. So it could be or programming, and then you have animation. There is a term called cottage industry, where in the house, uh, you make something, industrial goods, but what if there could be cottage service? So for example, as an anecdote, I know someone personally, in fact, my niece actually works as a personal secretary for someone abroad. And of course, she's not an OFW remittance, and that's probably not recorded just yet. So there are dollars that are coming in that are not explained by OFW remittance. I borrow from Donald Rumsfeld. He said there are unknown knowns. Case. Uh, we know, for example, that there is e-gambling, there is e-sabong, but we don't know how much of that comes in because of how much of that actually comes in. And then there are unknown unknowns, which is we don't even know they exist, but they are out there and dollar is coming in because of those. Now I go to public finance. In public finance, so you'd see here a history of budget deficits. So the yellow ones, of course, is President Corazon Aquino, then President here, the surplus here, President Ramos, and then you have President Arroyo, then you have President Pinoy, then President Duterte, and President Marcos Jr. So what we have here, so you can have deficits, that's fine. In fact, the conventionally accepted deficit is less than 3%. And so we had that for the most part from 1988 to around 1998. And then also for the most, then some parts of President Arroyo and mostly during the whole of President Pinoy, so less than, but this is sort of excuse. It went up the deficit because of the pandemic. So the humanitarian thing to do was to have a deficit and help the people who are who were hardly living. But then again, what I have the next few years is these are still very high. It's still above the threshold of conventionally accepted 3%. So you have the steady state. So if the economy is growing around 6.2%, that's the steady state. So hopefully it will stay below, but the outright goal is for the deficit to be less than 3%. Why is it still above the pre-pandemic? And the reason for that is, I'll go here. The red one is the uh, expenditure of government as a proportion of GDP. And what I have here in the blue is revenue collection as a proportion of GDP. And you'd see here that our government is collecting, so we can probably praise the Department of Finance, our Bureau of Internal Revenue, our tax people, because they are collecting the highest the past 20 years. So it's above 16% or around now or close to 17%. Okay. So what's happened, however, is in 2020, so that's the spending as a proportion of GDP. And what happened then was because of pandemic, we have to help the people who were hardly living, some even dying, and therefore expenditure increased. And then it started to go down because the pandemic, the crisis from pandemic slowly started to go down. But what happened after the pandemic is still up there. So basically, what we see here is the present administration is still spending as if we are in a pandemic. That's where the problem is. Okay. So what happens now to the total debt? Of course, uh, the, 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 the story here is if we are to go back, so this is the pandemic, and this is what happened during the global financial crisis. After the global financial crisis, our debt continued to increase by 3 trillion pesos. So as debt grew to 8.2 trillion pesos, what happened is debt, the debt as a percentage of GDP has declined to 42%. Okay. So we did not eliminate the debt through austerity, but what we did was that we outgrew our debt. However, of course, because of the pandemic, the debt to GDP ratio had gone up to 62%. We now have the debt became something like 16.5 trillion. Uh, uh, so what this is it went up here, and then we can make an argument that 2022 ended the pandemic, and what's happened here is it still hasn't gone down. So it would have been a 10-year process of going down, but no, the debt to GDP ratio continues to increase. So what happened is, okay, so just to give us a, perspective, so it is just over the Maastricht Treaty conventional acceptable threshold of, well, if you reach over 60%, then that means you are you are in an IMF watch list. Okay. However, it is below the 90% Reinhardt-Rugoff threshold of 90%. That means if the debt to GDP ratio goes over 90%, it would start slow down the economy. However, the looming problem out there is the rest of the world has a debt to GDP ratio of 95%. So it could be a global crisis, financial crisis waiting to explode. So what happened here is three down, X to go. Three down, X to go, meaning I would say that the 1983 collapse in the economy that ended with which ended with the 1986 people power. It did not start 3 years before. Actually, it started in 1965, and that was about so many years of fiscal mismanagement, price control, subsidy, and nationalization. So a series of mistakes for about 20 years. And this one here, what we're doing here is it's a series of mistakes the past 3 years. Question is, 3 years has gone down, X to go. How many years can we hold on to this? Because this is not sustainable. If we keep on doing this, and if we don't do our voting pattern, then we will go back to 1983 in X number of years. So in public finance, I go to the foreign debt. So the same goes, what we have done in the past is as external debt grew to 2.8 trillion pesos, the external debt to GDP ratio had declined from 50% before. Now it was down to 15%. And then the pandemic came. And you would see here the pandemic, and of course you have to borrow because there's pandemic, but the pandemic ended in 2022. Now the question is, with COVID-19, that's necessary. You have to borrow to help the people who were suffering. But after COVID-19, after 2022, it is still up there, which means it is still spending or government is still borrowing as if there is pandemic. Then you have the public finance and domestic debt. So as the debt grew from 2 trillion to 5.4 trillion, the debt to GDP ratio had declined from 38% to 28%. But because of the pandemic, this has to shoot up. So we go to 2022, that's with the pandemic. But what happened after the pandemic, it's still up there. So it is still borrowing as if there is pandemic. So again, that's 3 years of mistake. It's a matter of if we don't reverse course, it could be a looming crisis. But again, the crisis of 1983 was started in 1965. So it could be many more years of this before something bad happens. So not to be alarmist. But then again, it's still a mistake. So this is my second to the last slide. So I'll go. So those who are old enough, please remember. Those who are not old enough, please learn. And the rest, you can deny history. So for example, in 1971, a special fund was initially created under President Marcos Sr. with broad uses including oil-related projects. In 1979, the fund's focus shifted to price stabilization primarily through subsidies on oil imports for government entities. In 1984, the Oil Price Stabilization Fund was formally established and implemented primarily to soften oil price increases every 2 months. In 1985, the Executive Order Number 1024 formalized the Oil Price Stabilization Fund. In 1990, the Petroleum Price Standby Fund was created to support the OPSF from financial bleeding. So they created another fund to support a bleeding fund. And in 1998, after more than 20 years, we finally learned that the downstream oil industry was deregulated. We finally learned that we cannot subsidize these things. But I suppose some people have not learned. In 2025, the Pantawid Pasada program is expected to provide fuel subsidy to 179,852 units, or 100% of public utility JEEPS units with existing LTFRB franchise. So you want them to modernize to clean energy, and at the same time, you send the wrong message by providing subsidy for fossil fuel. So to wrap up, the annual growth will be 5.5%, the fastest in Asia, albeit negative output gap. Inflation, the average annual inflation will be 1.4%, which is going to be below the 2 to 4% range. And this one would give room for the central bank to basically lower interest. As far as unemployment, there is comparable to OECD rates. So the unemployment rate is comparable to OECD rates and at full employment, so that's good. International finance, this is good news. The Philippines will move sideways. We have an ample reserve. It is a question of the dollar, where it moves. Public finance, 3 down. I said X to go, or maybe 17 to go, because 1965 to 1986 was 20 years of mistake. Once again, in fiscal mismanagement, price control, subsidy, and nationalization. So, oh, maybe I should go with this. I anticipate people keep asking me. So I'll just probably answer this. What about the 19% tariff? I'll take the 19% with a grain of salt, because the President Trump has a habit of saying things in public. We don't know what's happening behind doors, closed doors, when there is negotiation. So this is a blanket expression, and it's probably a 19% is to please his voters. So it's probably a jet ski statement, and 19% is probably a suntukan tayo statement, which is we don't know. I don't have the answer to that because we don't know what's happening. They're still negotiating. The 19% is something that President Trump just said it out of the blue. Why did President Bongbong Marcos Jr. said something? I think it was the right thing to do. We should give him credit for that. If President Trump says something that's silly, and if that word leader contradicts President Trump in front of TV, for example, President Zelensky, or for example, President Macron, it could be ugly with two leaders debating in front in TV. So probably President Marcos Jr. did the right thing. He just shut up, say nothing, and have the negotiations continue in closed doors. Okay, thank you.